One. All right. I believe that takes us live. Hello, lords and ladies of the internet. Welcome back to the King of Candor's podcast, the Council of Candor. Sorry for being a little bit late here. We had a couple technical difficulties on the side. Bright House is doing some shenanigans and had to wrangle the fine folks up here for the show today. But yeah, today we're going to be covering the first of the Thomas Covenant. I guess the first book of the first trilogy of the Thomas Covenant Chronicles, Lord Foul's Bane. And before we get into it, I would like to do a quick ring around of the hosts, and I want to also explain why we got this book. So the reason we picked this book is I've heard many, many things about this. It's somewhat infamous in the fantasy, literature sphere. This book is mostly just known as the one with a non-consensual opening. And I had a feeling that this book, because it used to be so incredibly popular, that there's something missing here. That there's got to be more than just that one scene that makes this book memorable. So I've had this on my back burner to read for years now. And we finally, thanks to the podcast, got around to reading it. And I was very excited because this at one time was pitched as Destroy Lord of the Rings, and this would prove, like the new wave of fantasy. That was sort of true, but not in the way that they were expecting it to be. So, before we continue further, I think we should go around the horn, and I'll have everybody introduce themselves and tell us what their thoughts on the book are. First up, Mr. Shadow Magic Goat. How are you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing great. I really, 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 really hate this book. It was truly an awful experience.
Yeah. That from several people. And anything
Yeah,
else
I'm
you want to add
suggesting the
before
book.
I put the intro?
I have nothing to add for the intro. I regret reading this. I kind of regret reading this book. I'm kind of happy I read it. I'm also not happy. I have interesting comments about this book.
Very much forward to getting further into details. But you did complete the book, which is good. I know several people had to tap
I did.
out.
Yes, I did. I did read every single word.
Next up
Every
is
little
our...
last droplet.
Oh. There's audio issues. I'm being
audio
told.
issues.
What's the audio issue?
Let's see. I'll unmute the stream and listen to it. That sounds all right to me.
How you doing?
Hey there, Pimp.
Doing good. I had homework?
Yes.
No, it's the thing that this podcast is about. This is the book club podcast.
Once a month we do a book club.
Ooh, I'm in the I'm in the wrong room. Excuse me while I make my exit.
All right, get you later,
Okay.
Pip.
Take care. Flee to safety. I believe in you.
He's a friend. He streams on Twitch. Go harass him there and yell at him to read more books. He needs to read more. But anyway, so I figured next we're gonna go to our resident author, Mr. Peg. Would you like to tell us
That's me.
How you feel about this?
Yeah, this is not a good book. The worst thing about this book is that it had a lot of potential, but the author clearly has some weird demons going on in his head because the outcome was not good, and I think we'll get into why I'm saying there's some weird demons in his head. Yeah, not good. Would not recommend this book to literally anybody. It was a slog to read. I skipped dozens and dozens of pages of it because of the just long, endless, explanations of things that I don't care about and have no relevance to the story. Not good. Not good. That's the overall takeaway. Not good.
All right. And last but not least, Miss Tawata, would you like to tell us how much of the book you got into?
I think I got about 23 pages into it. I really struggled. I think part of it was stylistic. It just felt very dry, the little bit that I did read. The story didn't hook me soon enough to get past that hurdle. Barely any of this book read, and I'm kind of for it after hearing what people have said about it so far.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Kid owes me a beer.
Yeah, I do. I think I owe a couple people therapy. I do think that before we fully dive
Yeah.
into some quite funny things, I noticed if you go to the audiobooks on YouTube, that you see a comment or two from people who are clearly in the server who've been forced to read it. And I thank you for your sacrifices, my friends, for keeping up with the book in the book club. I did not expect it to be like
I
this
don't
at
know
all.
who left that comment.
Well, I want to
but
leave them a little
I'm
anonymous,
sorry
but I
that
know
you
they're part of the
mentioned
server. I know who they are here. But unless
Oh, I
I
see.
don't want to force them into the spotlight.
Mhm.
But I thank him
If you want a better
specifically.
book next time, you should vote for my suggestion.
Well, let's get into a little bit about this book. I think we've hidden from YouTube censors long enough. So,
Probably.
yeah,
Okay.
I think first,
So we
So this
can't
book
I-
is about.
well, hey, we need to give a
it's
content warning a little
it-
bit quickly. I do want to say for those, I know we
Yeah.
usually keep the podcast mostly light and pretty happy, but this does have a attached content warning this time. There is some, like I mentioned earlier, non-consensual acts in this book. Well, only one specifically. And this book's also borderline depression porn. It will make you
It really
depressed,
is.
or at least wants to make you depressed, but not. No, I don't think it makes you depressed the way the author intended.
Yeah, it makes you depressed
No.
because it sucks. It really sucks.
Awful. It's trash, bro. And I have some good things to say about the very beginning of the book. There's some parts that are kind of interesting. The first 30% of the book, you're kind of waiting for the moment where like things get interesting because there's
Yeah.
always this hint that it could get good. The prose are nice, the writing is is good. There's like this hint of like something greater, of like a really really interesting world, and we never get that.
Yeah, I think
No, we don't.
the most
I mean,
frustrating
we
thing
get too
about
much
this
of
book.
it.
Well, yeah, that's the other thing. But I think the most frustrating thing about this book is it's written incredibly well, like from a prose perspective, and the way that a lot of the descriptions are, you just get this really vivid image. The problem is there's too much of that. There's not enough action going on in the book, and the actual story is miserable to get through.
And when there is action, the book just cucks you out of it. I don't have a better word for it.
Yeah, it's because you're following a useless, dickless moron who can't affect any change in any way except by accident, which is
want to push back on that.
the worst.
He very clearly is not dickless.
I guess that's true. He definitely is not.
He commits a very, very important rape.
Is this the first isekai? Is this the first isekai?
I would say that a lot of people would say that Alice in Wonderland is the first isekai, but I would fully put this as more like the first isekai. The world clearly revolves around the main character. He's in denial the whole time. There's even an appearance from Truck-kun. That's how he gets sent into the isekai. He gets ran over by a truck. I don't know how that's the one trope that I can point to that 100% had to be started here. By the way, that's kind of a fake.
Let me tell you about. There are so many isekai tropes because I've read and watched a fair amount of isekais, and usually they're funnier than this. At least, even the bad ones are like kind of amusing. But this has so many tropes. We'll talk about it. I talked with Kid a little bit that there is, unless it's like 100 Monkeys situation, there's no way this book didn't inspire some Japanese authors, because there are just too many like very large trends in modern isekai that are from this book. And this book came out in 1977.
Yep.
Yeah, it lays down the formula that modern isekai follows.
So I do want to go,
which is very strange to see.
It's not strange, and I'll explain why in a second. But before we get into fully, I think a quick plot summary where I don't get into too much detail is going to go on. That way people know, who haven't read the book, kind of what they're in for. So the story follows Thomas Covenant, who's a young misanthropic author who had one book come out that was a wild success, and then immediately afterwards he got leprosy and his wife left him. He absolutely hates everybody, and he finds himself miserable because he's a leper. He gets hit by Truck-kun, as I mentioned earlier, which wakes him up in The Land, which is a classic fantasy world. he meets a little, like, basically a goblin called Drool Rockworm. God, I wish I could speak. And gets contacted by Satan himself, who's known as Lord Fowl the Despiser. By the way, I will say Lord Fowl, even though it's somewhat goofy, I think goes incredibly hard. Just walking up to people like, I am Lord Fowl. I can dig it.
Yeah, I think that's good, honestly, yeah.
Yeah.
So
This-
far, this
This
part of
book
the
flips
story,
between
we all
awesome
kind of
names and
like.
retarded names all
Yeah.
the time. It's fantastic.
Yeah, for real.
So he as in this fantasy world, he finds out that because he lost 2 fingers to leprosy on his right hand, it makes everybody think that he's the reincarnation of the hero. Something's going on weird in the OBS.
Oh,
Yeah, it makes everybody
great
think that he's
hero.
the reincarnated hero, Barrack Halfhand. And they're like, "Oh, you're Barrack Halfhand. He's the right hand man of our hero, Kevin." By the way, Kevin is never explained.
Kevin.
I don't know why Kevin has that name. Everybody in this book is named like High Lord Prothel or Lord Fowl or Leanna.
They're all
And-
fantasy names. They're
and
all
then
fantasy
Kevin.
names except the most important character in the lore. The single most important character in the lore, who's mentioned dozens and dozens of times through the books. His name is Kevin.
Just Kevin.
Just
is Lord Kevin, but like I don't understand why, and it's really interesting because you'd expect it to be setting up something, and that is a classic issue with this book. Is you expect it to be setting up something, and it kind of just doesn't. But it's a trilogy, so maybe he left these things on the grapevine for later. So anyway, as he wakes up in the land, Covenant realizes that he gets told by Satan, "Hey, you're my messenger. I brought you here to go deliver a message to these kings. Go tell them about that." He's trying to tell everybody what's going on with this message, and he the whole time is like, "This is bullshit. I'm in coma. You people aren't fucking real. This is all fake." And he goes through and finds several magical things, which are going to become important later. One of them is there's a bunch of berries around that are named treasure fruit that basically act like the good berry spell from D&D, which I'm going to bet this is where they got good berry from because this is very specifically pulled from here. And you know that the guys who wrote D&D were reading this because there's certain little things that are also put into D&D from this book. Then
Don't they legit call them good berries in the novel? I forget what they're called.
They're
Are
called
they
treasure
good berries?
berries.
I thought they were
Treasure
berries.
Yeah.
So
I think good berry is a much
D&D
better
from
name.
my
It's more evocative and druidic.
Yeah.
But
yeah,
so
I think part of D&D came out around the same time as this. Some D&D stuff was coming out around the same time, so there might have been a little bit of back and forth there.
things like that, we'll get into this fully. There's a thing called the Staff of Law in this setting, and it's very clear that this book is inspired by a lot of the same concepts that D&D was with the law versus chaos dichotomy, and that D&D took that. I think Mount Thunder's also in a D&D novel. The idea of fire lions and stuff like that. There's certain like little things that are very clearly in here, like the horses that are totally not horses in this novel are reinterpreted as mounts that dogmen ride.
Ronnie.
Yeah, they're reinterpreted as mounts that dog guys ride in Gary Gygax's world, and they're called the Rovers, which is a fucking fantastic name for people who ride mounted dogs because they're like the Mongols, they rover on the ren, but it's a rover's also a type of dog. Just Gary had a lot of fun stuff like that. One of these days we should cover the original Gary Gygax lore because it is fun and wild. But anywho, back to Lord Fowl. He tells Covenant, go deliver a message. Covenant, is all pissed off the whole time. He eats some good berries. He meets this lovely little girl named Lena. She's a 16-year-old, but she's all like, "Oh, I'm going to do the right thing because I'm a good person. I'm going to help you, Mr. Thomas Covenant." And he's like, "All right, this will have no deleterious consequences for either of us." She takes him back to her house. He meets her parents. They realize, "Oh, you are the chosen one. We need to help you." He gets so stressed about the chosen one things that he runs out into the woods. And after eating a bunch of good berries and getting healed from magical dirt called Hurt Loam, which is a dumb name, as we talked about, the names flip between great or stupid in this book. For some reason, when Lena shows up, he's like, "You know what? This is a dream. Nothing matters." Apparently, according to the internet, the good berries make you really horny. So Covenant makes the executive decision of, since nothing matters, I'm just going to rape this girl.
Nonsense.
I'm just going to start raping.
Well, let's
He doesn't even.
rephrase that a little bit. There's more to it. He asks about his wife, and he gets so angry that he smacks her, and
Oh, that's
then
right, he
he
just smacked her
decides
around
that he's
first.
just going to straight up rape her.
Yeah, I forgot
Yeah,
he
he
does
does
smack
beat
around
her
a bit
first,
first.
as you know, as he does.
And I'm gonna let you all
Yeah,
know right
and
now.
no, the whole internet of the whole people on the internet saying that the good berries make you horny, that's just stupid cope. That's just nonsense.
There's nothing
He
in
eats
this
them.
book about that.
Nobody else.
Yeah,
has
he
this
eats
problem.
them for the rest of the novel, and yeah, literally not once does it ever come up again. So it's
That's
just
all right.
nonsense.
I'm sure. Listen, if we just, I'm sure it just makes perfect sense. If a man can't feel his penis because of leprosy, and suddenly he can feel it again, obviously he's just going to commit rape. That's what this book says, because this book hates lepers.
So true.
Does hate leopard.
Lepers do in fact deserve leprosy, apparently.
Apparently, yeah.
By the way, oh yeah. So it just gets more intense. So after he rapes her, she feels so guilty about being raped by the hero that she says, "I cannot tell anybody that I was raped by him. I better just keep it to myself for my entire life." So that happens, and then Covenant goes back to that town, and her mom's like, "Oh, Lena, you look like you had a rough day." She's like, "I don't want to talk about it, Mom. You and Covenant should probably just leave immediately and go, help him out with his mission." And Covenant's, like, "That's a great idea." And there's no,
2 thumbs up for that one.
yeah, there's no like consequences for this. For the record, I know that people like online
There's
and other reviews
literally
I've seen said there's consequences. There's technically a consequence, but like we'll get to that. So after he
It's so minor.
yeah, he goes out and he goes on a trip with Lena's mom. It is grating. This is the part of the book, like after the rape, it takes a straight downturn because at that point, you're like, all right, this is his lowest point. He's been a misanthropic little bitch the whole time. He's been complaining, all right, he raped somebody. He cannot get worse than a child rapist. He finds a way, though, to make you hate him even more. He's complaining the whole time.
Even if
They
he
meet a group
didn't
of totally not elves. They meet some wraiths. They meet some mystical fairy things. They're just walking around meeting random things until she can't take him
Yeah.
anymore. And his mom's like, "I need to go home." By the way, she's crying and complaining and acting hysterical the whole time. She's got no clue that she's hanging out with her daughter's rapist. But she's just like depressed.
No,
and
she
upset.
does.
Not true.
That's not true, kid. That is not true. She
why
does find out.
I was gonna say until she does find
Yeah.
out. Yeah, but like she's still crying and complaining the whole time beforehand.
No.
I mean, she literally only finds out she finds out at the very beginning of the journey. They're like a day out of town when she finds out.
Really, I must
Remember the guy comes, tries to kill him. So there's a scene after they leave town where the person who was supposedly going to marry Lena comes.
Yeah, because
and
she's
he wants
betrothed.
to kill him.
Oh,
Yeah, she's betrothed.
Yes. Oh man.
Yep. The guy tries to kill him. The mother's like, "No, you can't. He's the chosen one." He tells her he raped your daughter. And so after that, she still says you can't kill him. He's the chosen one. And that's why she starts going hysterical and insane. He literally drives this woman raving mad. She goes insane because of him.
Yep.
And there's no consequences to that. There's literally no consequences to her insanity.
Yeah, she literally just disappears, and that's that.
Yeah, she gets so crazy, she just kind of like wanders off, and then he meets my favorite character of the book.
The best guy.
Yeah, the best
Foam follower.
Who should have been the main character, but we'll get into that later.
Yeah.
Yeah, Foam follower would have been an interesting main character. Although you would have had to put up with him fucking endlessly talking about everything for the whole book. But I guess you do anyway.
Moron is much better than somebody crying the whole time, personally. But that's just me.
That's true. That's true. A self-loathing worm is much worse.
Yeah.
Not to get too deep into it, but if you wanted a fish out of water story, when you learn more about the giants, it doesn't really work for his character as he is portrayed in the book. But like a younger giant would have the exact same scenario where he doesn't know that much about like how human society works. You could have had all the same explanations, all you wanted, and it would have been infinitely more fun.
Yeah. So Saltheart Foam follower. The giants are really cool, and this gets into one of the problems with this book. Is it randomly has just garbage lore where like, oh yeah, the elves are just elves who live in elf trees and they elf all the time. The half elven basically is what they're called. Then you get like, all right, that's boring and lame. Then the giants lore comes up, and Saltheart's like, yeah, man. So we got this like monster energy that we drink all the time because we have to row all the time because we are from another continent that sank into the ocean. We think, and we keep like sailing around till we can find it again. So like all of the giants are like these awesome sailors, and they row their boats manually and stuff, and they have like these special powered things, and they're constantly exploring, trying to find their homeland, and they also are immortal. So like they remember their homeland, but they just can't find it again. and they survived like several
Yeah, there's-
apocalypses to get here. And you listen to them talk like, that is so fucking interesting. Where have you been this entire book? I've been getting generic.
Yeah, there's a
basic
lot
lore
of
from
fertile
everybody
ground.
else.
Yeah, it's depressing because, like I said, there's a lot of good stuff in here. If like the author hadn't been looking to do what he did,
The story is disappointing.
Gets
It really is, yeah.
disappointed. So then they eventually get to the Council of Lords, and after spending about 4 hours arguing with each other, like, should we go or should we not go? And they keep asking Covenant, hey, could you just tell us what happened? And he's being so coy about it, doesn't want to tell them the truth until they
Like,
eventually
no.
look, dude.
Nuh-uh.
You know,
I'm not gonna.
we're
tell
gonna
you.
drag you kicking and screaming. Come on.
Nuh-uh. And then he still fucking lies to him. He's still fucking. I mean, I guess if you rape an underage girl, you're probably going to lie about it later. That does seem logical. One meets two there, but
I don't like it.
it's still extremely irritating to read when the main character. This is at this point you're like 40-50% of the way through the book, and he is still rejecting the call to heroism.
Yeah.
Still, which is not something you should expect to change because literally he never accepts the call to heroism. Literally until the last page in the book, he does not accept the call to heroism. He is a pathetic worm 100% of the way through.
Yeah,
It
This
never
book
stops.
is long, by the way.
It is
should
so
add that.
long.
This is not a short book.
I am
It's not
adding
like-
details here to try to help spread it out. If you go to Wikipedia, the plot summary, it literally goes, he shows up, he's got leprosy, they explains who Jewel Rockworm is, the guy we talked about, the goblin, says he rapes Lena, explains Lord Fowl, then it says after raping raping Lena, he goes to tell the lords about Lord Fowl, and then they all go with the secret, band to infiltrate Mount Thunder. That sentence, they go with a band to infiltrate Mount Thunder, is like 7 chapters of them walking.
Yeah, it's like 20% of the book, and it sucks. It sucks the whole time.
It is the biggest slog I've ever dealt with. And every time something interesting happens, the book goes out of its way to say, no, we don't like interesting things here. Like, they come back across the elves, and like, oh, let's go ask the elves for help. Oh, look, they've all been raped and murdered and burned to the ground. That's really terrible. They use tactics. These couldn't be goblins because they were so much smarter. So clearly this is Satan's doing, Lord Fowl himself. He's too smart to, because he, took the elves and he burned the outside of the trees so they'd all get clustered in the middle until they all died of smoke. Oh, wow, what an actual battle strategy. Then they say, oh, look, there's 2 survivors here. They are both deleterious. One is a woman who keeps saying, oh, I can't tell you what happened. Like, every time she does, she collapses. And the other one is a little boy who doesn't say anything. And they're like, oh, we can't figure out what's going on here. Now, chat, I want you to think for a second. I don't know how many of you are military strategists. If you walk into a situation where the entire elven race has been genocided, and you find 2 people who've not been genocided, a woman and a child, and they are just disabled enough that they can't go anywhere, but just active enough that you want to stand there and spend time talking, trying to figure out what's wrong with them. What do you think that is? You think maybe it could be some sort of ambush? Because it takes these people about 7 hours to realize, hang on a second, this is an ambush. Are you stupid?
Which they survive with minimal casualties anyway.
Yeah, and it didn't matter.
The best part, oh man, the best part about the battle is how Thomas Covenant bravely cowers and cries the entire time so that you can't see anything interesting.
Oh no,
He
he
does
doesn't.
do interesting things. He sees one thing where some of the lords who are with them die of a heart attack in the middle of the battle. And one of the soldiers doesn't know that, so he dies protecting the dead bodies of these lords who came with them. Afterwards, Covenant comes out and makes sure that there's an entire speech about how stupid that guy was because he died for those people who are already dead, and how he should feel bad, and all soldiers are retards for this.
Oh, and also he actually does something interesting in this fight. He does something interesting. He hops out of the hole, and he kills 5 whole cave wights, which are the goblins.
Yeah.
And then, after the battle, he feels so bad about it that he swears off killing forever. You think, oh wow, he's about to have a character moment. There's going to be some character development here. This might be the beginning of an arc. We're 70% of the way through the book, but maybe he'll actually have... No. Immediately afterwards, he's like, wow, what have I done? I killed these genociding monsters. I'm a monster now. And then he shuts down for the rest of the book. That comes later. He realizes that was bad later on when he's sitting in a fire with a bunch of new allies, and then he decides that he needs to throw himself into the fire.
By the way, speaking of that,
I hate
I do want to say, Foam Follower, the Beth character, when he sees these goblins, he swears off his oath of pacifism and goes and commits a goblin genocide to the point where it makes him go somewhat insane because he killed so many goblins and he's going to have to hear what they're like, screaming for the rest of his life. Covenant is having a meltdown over killing 5. When it said in the book, Foam Follower chases them around for hours and makes sure that a single one of them survives to go back and report to them. Like... Yeah. Again, the best characters over here doing shit, and Thomas Covenant's crying in the corner while he's doing stuff. It sucks.
Yeah, it's just utterly absurd. Anyway, so after this, after seeing a whole bunch of other random miscellaneous crap, they meet some Plains people. There's another 16-year-old girl. He manages to control his urge this time. Luckily.
And you know what's really upsetting about this? When she shows up, she's like, I'm basically a woman. I can do full woman things now. Look at me, I'm a real woman. And the whole time she's like, oh no, oh no, oh no.
Yeah. He's like baiting it the whole time. Like, why are you doing this? Why are you subjecting me to this, Donaldson? What the hell is wrong with you?
Oh, let's touch on an important thing. Let's talk about the redemption of the rape that happens here.
I think because that's what this is setting up the Plains people, because this is important for why the rape gets redeemed. So the Plains people show up and they're like, "Hey, we have these horses that are like super powered and super cool, and they hate everybody. And like, if you show up, the horses like will ask interview questions and they'll just leave if they don't like you." And Covenant is just so cool. Literally every horse ever shows up, and there's Plains people like, "Oh, holy shit." Thomas Covenant, you're like, superhero. We thought it was cool when 5 horses showed up once. You've got all of them here. You must be the most noble man ever.
He's such a Mary Sue. He is such a Mary Sue. It is so irritating.
Down about this because he wants to, molest more people, and everyone's saying he's the best. And so he yells at the horses and tells them to visit Lena once a year. So he makes 5 magic ponies visit his rape victim once per year. Yep. And after that, he basically redeems himself in his own mind or something. It was the most confusing, shitty scene I've ever read. Probably not the worst, but it was so jarring to think it's like, is this really how it resolves? Because they never bring it up again.
Afterwards, all the lords are like, I can't believe you're happy now. And like everybody, he sleeps it off, and everybody's like, oh, good job. You came back from that rape, man. I'm sure she's going to love to see a horse once a year for the rest of her life.
Well, no one knows about it because he never tells anyone else about it, ever. And the mother never tells anyone else about it. Yeah.
Because they would.
Well, no, they wouldn't. They wouldn't have stabbed him. Are you kidding me? There's no way they would have stabbed him. Everything else in the book, they would have just been like, "Oh, okay, Thomas Covenant, you just do whatever you want. Literally anything that you want, whatever it is, you do that. It's cool. No, it's really cool. I like how you're standing by and letting our guys die. I like that. Keep doing that. You're good."
I think the worst part of the story when it comes to this second half of the book is before they leave, when he finally shows the white gold ring, which is his wedding band, which we'll talk about that when we loop back to the beginning. They tell this prophecy about how he's saved and damned and he's a fool. And I'm reading it and I'm thinking, the whole people can't understand him thing. Usually, especially in isekai stories, when things like that happen, it's because they're using knowledge from Earth in this fantasy world. It's not a way to tell the audience that this incomprehensible fucking loser it's totally fine that everything he does is incomprehensible because a magic plot thing told him that it's okay.
Yeah. It's infuriating. He has literally no redeeming qualities. Zero. There is nothing redeeming about Thomas Covenant. There's nothing. I tried for a while today to come up with at least one redeeming quality to talk on the podcast, but nothing. There's nothing redeeming.
Rape once. That's his redeeming quality.
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah, he only had to rape once to learn that it was bad.
I'm gonna tell you right now. Hold your horses. Peg and chat. We're going to get into another book, at the end of this podcast. I think Thomas Covenant is going to have the special medal as the least rapey protagonist, and I'll explain that later. So,
great.
So after the horses, and he forgives himself for raping the 16-year-old girl because he's sending a horsey to her once a year. And the whole time, by the way, they're fighting these monsters all the time, and he just sits there and cries until like everybody starts dying. And after like 3 or 4 of his friends die, then he uses his magic ring to just win the fight. That happened like 3 times. I'm just like, dude, what the fuck? Like,
For
just,
real.
if you're gonna use the ring,
Over and over again.
use it. If you're not gonna use the ring, don't use it.
He never does. He never purposely uses the ring.
He does
Never,
once.
not once. No, even at the very end, he has to be forced. You don't remember that? When he's reaching for the staff, Banor grabs his wrist because he's refusing to do it still, and Banor's like, "Nope, I'm not dying here. I'm not dying here.
Yeah,
you are using your power."
Alpha Chad.
Yeah.
All the lords are like 70 years old, and they're just coming out in this quest to kick ass. By the way, the lords are like every character but Thomas Covenant is like worth following, and it's weird because at the very least they make passable like Deuteragonus and another story. All of them are like, okay, they're not my favorite person I've ever met, but if you put them in another tale or like had them along the ride, I don't think I dislike any of them, which is weird.
There's even one of the lords is literally a better version of Thomas Covenant.
Yeah.
One of the lords, I believe it's the High Lord, the oldest guy, he's also dealing
Prothel.
with like mental anguish. Because he's very old and he thinks that like everyone thinks that he can't do things and he's like doubting himself. And he goes through a little arc where he like learns to not doubt himself anymore. And that's another example of, man, if you wanted to just have a self-loathing protagonist, why didn't you pick the old man? He probably would have had a more interesting story to tell.
For real.
And then they eventually get to totally not Mount Doom, it's Mount Thunder, after going through many trials and tribulations. And they sneak in there, they go through some cool illusion magic things, which, again, I think that this, going back to the D&D connection, the way that some of the illusion spells are described here and some of the wards fully feel like the way D&D does it, so I would not be surprised if that was inspiration. Anywho, after they go through that, they sneak into the abyss, try to find like this guy Drool Walkworm, who's got the staff that they need to get to stop Lord Fowl eventually. And as Pag mentioned earlier, shenanigans happen where Thomas Covenant gets to confront this guy, and he doesn't. He like punches him once, and he complains that he hates punching people until another hero has to grab the weapon and like do it for him. Afterwards, they're like, okay, we won, and we managed to kill all through Rockworm. Oh no, we're going to be attacked. So Covenant then teleports everybody like to the top of the mountain, and then after all,
they all run out. He doesn't teleport them. They just leave.
Yeah, and then when they get to the top of the mountain, he summons fire lions, which are like lava monsters, and then they go down and like kill all the bad guys, and then he just wakes up after that. He's like, wakes up in his body.
The best part of the story. How can we forget it was all a dream?
Yeah,
literally all just a dream. He
and,
just wakes up in a hospital bed and he's a lettering.
Yeah, so remember, think about this, chat. Lord Fowl, the whole time we've been talking about how great he is, we need to kick his ass. We don't get that fight. We kill like Lord Fowl's second in command ish, and then Thomas Covenant's like, okay, now I'm going to send, I'm going to summon the eagles to kill the rest of them, and he summons these fire lions, and then like it cuts. Did everybody die? Did everybody get out of there okay? No idea. Figure it out.
Doesn't matter.
It was all a dream.
Yeah.
That he finally has character development because he really wants them to have lived. That's his character development.
Yep.
We spent however many hundreds of pages it was by the end. I was so delirious from hatred that I don't even know the page count at this point. And that's his character development after the entire story. Yeah. 180. I hope he got out. 408. Jesus Christ.
Yeah. This book
I can't believe it. It felt like so much more. I can't believe it was only 480.
It has 124,000 words. That's a pretty long novel.
It's a big novel. And I would just like to say, because now we're going to really rip the book in half because we haven't started yet. This is just the pretext. That I've read so many things online of people arguing why this book is good. And none of those arguments have actually convinced me in any way.
Yeah, because it's not a good book. There's very little good about it. The prose is good. That's it. That's pretty much it. It's also got very fertile ground. It's got he sets up this idea where you're looking at this world from the perspective of a leper, which is a thing out of left field. It's not something that you see. But
it's interesting.
Then he just Yeah, then he just shits the bed continuously for the next 100,000 words.
I don't know. Does he hate lepers? Does he think that they're all rapists and they like deserve our contempt? Or does God hate lepers and that's why this book was written? I don't know anymore. I don't even know what my beliefs are anymore after reading this book. It's fucking maddening.
So
Look, Thomas Covenant is a shitty person. He was predestined to be a shitty person. He deserves leprosy.
I think we need to
Aaron?
quickly cover that because chat's gonna be a little confused. So something to remember, and this is I don't like to do this often with fantasy authors or any authors really, but sometimes when you look at something, there's some inexplicable things or something that's just so wild that you have to look at the fantasy or the author behind it and say, how did you come up with this? And I'm gonna give a positive example really quick. The dead marches in Lord of the Rings are horrific. They're really evocative. And like the descriptions there are different than the rest of the book in a good way. It really makes you just feel how terrible the situation is. And that only can happen because Tolkien fought in World War One, and that's things he saw. Just piles of bodies just laying there underneath still water because nobody can retrieve them because snipers will kill them. You know that's what he saw. That's all the dead marches are, is a World War One battlefield, but with fantasy characters walking through it. It's horrible in a good way. So you look at it like, wow, he's using his personal beliefs that's influencing this. Also, the way that the characters of Lord of the Rings are like proactive and work in groups together and all have a similar morality. That's again Tolkien's Christian worldview of how Christian morality should be. That's all good. Unfortunately, here, the author, let's see, what's his first name? Stephen or Donaldson. He's a Calvinist, and I know a couple Calvinists. They're mostly good people.
He grew up in a Calvinist home. He
Yeah,
grew up in a Calvinist home. I think he's
I believe he's
conscientious.
atheist or agnostic now. After reading some interviews with him, he seems very misanthropic as a person. But Calvinists, they have this idea of predestination, where God's already decided if you're good or evil. So because God's already decided if you're good or evil, any action you take has already been chosen by God. Which knowing
It
that,
is what it is.
yeah, knowing that really helps you understand why all the characters love Covenant so much, because they exist in a Calvinist headspace. They go through and say, "Hey, we love you, Calvin, not Calvin, Covenant," because that's what Calvinists would say to do. Because he's already been chosen by God as the hero. It doesn't matter what he does; he's already going to get into heaven, and he's deserving of it. Which is just
it's absurd.
Yeah.
And it just comes off as him being a giant Mary Sue. It just comes off as every single person he meets is just like automatically like, oh wow, you're just the greatest. I just love you for all of your long list of non-enumerated positive qualities. I just love you so much, and I'm gonna do anything it takes to get you where you need to be. And that's every single character in the book. Even when he meets Lord Fowl at the beginning, he's like, oh, you're going to be the one to defeat me. It's going to be very, very bad. Even though you're going to be an idiot the whole time, you'll still beat me. It is infuriating.
So I do want to also ruin this even further. One of the redeeming qualities I thought going through this whole book is, hey, is this book one of a trilogy? Obviously, we're going to meet the characters here. Then the next book that comes out, which maybe I'll force the chat to read. This is when I was like halfway through the book.
Oh,
by the way.
no.
I thought maybe
you're gonna have to do that podcast on your own, Chief. I'm not reading the second one of
I've
these.
heard from multiple
No
people.
way.
Hey,
There's
hang
no
on,
way.
shush. I've heard from multiple people book 2 is better, and I'm like, oh, it's probably because they established all the shit here and he figured out how to write. So book 2 opens, and Covenant's on the phone with his wife, and then he falls and hits his head. And he's suddenly back in the land. Okay.
Oh boy.
And it's been 40 years. All the characters you met are dead. Except for Lena.
Yep.
She's
except for Lena, of course, who is turbo traumatized.
Yep, she's so traumatized that she literally rocks back and forth all day crying from being raped. 40 years ago.
Well, I mean, she lived in a world where there was literally no evil, and everyone she knew had an oath of peace, and then Thomas Covenant comes into the world and introduces evil.
Yeah.
Like,
I'm not saying she's wrong for it.
Like,
I'm saying
I'm evil.
Yeah, this is what happens. The poor girl's, been raped and she's crying for 40 years. She went insane from that. That's just how traumatic it was for her. Then Thomas
But-
meets his daughter, who's the rape baby. And she's like,
she's
oh, yeah. She's like, oh, you know what, Thomas? I'm glad that I got to meet you. You're pretty cool, and I'm gonna forgive you for making my mom go crazy, raping her.
Yeah, dap me up, Daddy-O.
So yeah,
You thought this might be awkward, but it's not. We're friends.
It's all
immediately.
fine. He did nothing wrong, apparently, according to the author. Nothing wrong was committed. And that's the problems. I hate this book so much, it makes me want to hate the author. Usually it's very easy to separate the author from the work. Because especially a lot of very sad works, they're usually written, not all the time, but sometimes they're written, they come from a sad place in the author's life. But Thomas Covenant, even
explore
if
something
this
evil and fascinating. I've seen that a lot of times.
Yeah, or you want to explore something evil and fascinating. But the problem is, even if the rape scene never happened, even if that was never a plot point, we completely cut it. It didn't affect this, wasn't in the story. Thomas Covenant is still a miserable piece of shit.
Yeah, for real. For real.
It's just his rape exposes it instantly, oh, you're this bad.
Yeah.
It's wild how much he sucks.
And
the whole time he's complaining about it. He's the victim after he rapes this girl. He's the victim of the whole story.
There's a quote in the beginning of the book. A beggar gives him a note. And in this note, it talks about, and this is according to many people, this is the theme of the book. This is the big thing. It talks about a man being taken to another world and being forced to fight in an arena, right? And if he loses,
you can read it to everybody if you want.
If you want to pull it up and read, I'm pretty sure I sent it to you in DMs as well. The whole crux of the story is apparently based off of this quote, according to some people online.
A beggar's note. A real man. All the ways that we recognize that real. That's real. Finds himself suddenly abstracted from the world and deposited in a physical situation which could not possibly exist. Sounds have aroma, smells have color and depth, sights have texture, touches have pitches and timbre. There he is informed by a disembodied voice that he has been brought to this place as a champion for his world. He must fight to the death in single combat against a champion from another world. If he is defeated, he will die in his world. The real world will be destroyed because it lacks the inner strength to survive. The man refuses to believe that's what he is told is true. He asserts that he is either dreaming or hallucinating and declines to be put in a false position of fighting to the death where no real danger exists. He is implacable in his determination to disbelief in his apparent situation and does not defend himself when attacked by the champion of the world. Question: is the man's behavior courageous or cowardly? This is a fundamental question of ethics. I do think that's an interesting ethical question. I don't think this book explores that anyway meaningfully.
No,
it doesn't. Absolutely not. I guess if we really want to say, if it's trying to say that Thomas Covenant is a coward because he doesn't believe in the fictional world, I guess sure we can go with that. But it's one of those things where it's an interesting question, and it feels like setup to something that never really pays off. The whole conversation with the beggar never pays off. There's a moment where Thomas rips off his ring and he gives it to this random beggar. And the beggar refuses to take it. He says, I can't have this ring. It's too valuable. Even though he's blind and begging on the street, you must remain true. And I thought at the time reading this book, oh, you must remain true to your wife. Is that going to be the moral of the story? Foolish me who hadn't read the book. No, it doesn't mean anything. Maybe it's supposed to be remain true to the real world. He doesn't do that by the end because he starts believing, he starts wanting people to escape. It definitely doesn't mean anything about fidelity because I'm pretty sure rape counts as cheating on yourself.
I think it doesn't even mean tell the truth, which you'd think is what it means on the more basic level. He lies all the fucking time. and gets away with it.
Yeah, true to yourself, a miserable asshole. I'd also like to say, talking about shitting on Thomas Covenant as a character, he is established as being incredibly rich. He is a very well-off person. People are trying to pay his bills at the beginning, and he's trying to stop that because he wants to assert himself in the world. But he is super, super wealthy. And he never does anything with this. It's just another little thing, really. It doesn't matter. He doesn't have to do anything with the money, but it's not like he ever starts a charity to help lepers. The only interesting thing we see him do in the real world is he reads the book that made him tons of money and how happy and positive it is. And he's like, this is shit. This is dog water. I shouldn't have written this. This is awful. How foolish I was to think that good things could happen.
It is
I hate him so much. He's
special.
such an awful character.
Now, I do want to
Don't-
give the one piece of, I don't know, shielding, I guess, to this book that I am going to do this entire time. It doesn't make it right, but I think this explains why the book is so incredibly popular. This book came out in 1977, as we previously mentioned. This is 20 years after Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, and those books were really incredibly popular to the point where there are multiple dozens of rip-off books that have come out since then and have been, riffing on it. This book is an anti-Lord of the Rings. This does exactly when we look back on Game of Thrones in 30 years from now, this is what Game of Thrones is going to probably be viewed like. Just a miserable world where everything sucks. The difference is Game of Thrones right now is popular enough that you have other people making content in it, which is going to make the world stand out. Whereas this book came out at a time where there's no secondary content market, so people couldn't make other things to stand out. Because you're going to find out that, as you're reading, through this book, it's specifically designed in a way to lambast and poo-poo on Tolkien. There's a fellowship that goes off on a great quest. They've got wizard staffs. They can cast spells. There's the ring bearer who's reluctant, who's been touched by evil. You've got all the elves and stuff that exist, and all the elves get destroyed in this book, and it is very explicitly an anti-Tolkien work.
Yeah.
And
yeah, dude is trying to be Tolkien so hard. He's really trying to be Tolkien. Except everything sucks.
There's a little bit of context, though. So J.R.R. Martin and this guy know each other. They're friends.
So I believe that.
Something interesting to keep in mind. Apparently, they have people say they have a nephew relationship. I don't know where the fuck they're getting that from. That sounds like they're just making things up. But supposedly they are friends. And the main difference between this and Game
this fucker's still alive.
Yeah, this guy's still alive. Game of Thrones has fun characters. Sometimes characters are fun. Even even though there's a lot of problems with Game of Thrones, but even then, reading Game of Thrones isn't a miserable, awful experience.
I don't know, man.
When I read
when people are shitting themselves for pages that I don't want to read.
It's true. Don't get me wrong, there are really bad parts of that story, and really why is this written? Why was this penned? But overall, I the entire time you're reading it, you don't think to yourself, man, I wish I was reading about literally anybody else.
Yeah.
Because the author changes perspective, and you do read other people's perspectives. That being said, you're probably right. There will definitely be a time in the future where people look back on Lord of the Rings and they react to, I don't know, the inciting incident of the entire series where they push a little kid.
Lord of the Rings.
Game of Thrones, yes. My bad. When they push the little kid out of a window to hide their incest sex, people will look at that and they'll probably react similar to how I'm reacting now, where I'm like, wow, what a fucking monster.
All right, so the big difference is those characters are supposed to be monsters. GRRM is a gigantic fucking hack, but at least he realizes that what he's writing is a poopy world filled with poopy people who are all covered in poop and like to throw poop at other people. That's his whole thing. In this story, they're treating Thomas Covenant constantly as if he is a hero.
Jesus. He's Jesus. They
Literally.
liken him to Jesus at the end.
And in the last 2 pages, they're like, the doctor's like, oh, hey, I always thought that,
Set up the context. So Covenant wakes up in the hospital. He's realized everything he's been doing is a fake dream. And then a random doctor who we've never met before comes in. And as Pag, would you like to say what he says to Covenant?
Yeah, he's like, oh, I always thought that lepers were like Jesus. You know, they have wounds on their hands and feet. So they're like Jesus. Isn't that interesting? Aren't you like Jesus, little boy? He pats him on the head and he sends him out of the hospital.
Bookends.
And that's the last page of the book. That's it. Like, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? He's not like Jesus at all. He's like the anti-Jesus.
At best, he's Judas.
Yeah, at best,
even Judas has some redeeming qualities. Remember, everybody, Judas hung out with these guys for like 20 years. He was their bro.
Yeah.
Judas made one mistake. Covenant is an existing mistake.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, people liked him before his betrayal. That's the thing. It's not like this guy where, like, everyone has to put up with him.
Yeah.
So I do want to note that this book came out 6 months after Swords of Shannara, which is like by Terry Brooks, which is like the most generic fantasy book that's like super popular. Again, these 2 books will completely flip fantasy on their head. So this is why, if you're wondering why this is so popular, it's because that. Think about when like Iron Man came out in movies. There had been dozens of superhero media beforehand. But Iron Man really, maybe Blade you could consider, but Iron Man I want to point to is the first time that it's like super taken seriously and it's a world that you want to get involved in, or like the Dark Knight's other one, where it sets the entire thing on fire and starts this trend. That's what these 2 books did. This is like the Dark Knight and Iron Man. Except the problem is, these books, this book specifically, in its attempt to be like an anti-Tolkien work, it's fucking miserable to read.
It's so awful.
So bad.
You could probably cut out like 60% of the novel too. I think that's the worst part about the novel, is that about 60% of it is just exposition on random things that happen in the world that you have no need of understanding or knowing in order to read the story.
And they don't come back. That's another thing I want to make important. The real problem that people have with like Lord of the Rings is a great example. Everybody says Lord of the Rings drags like this book does because like, oh, every character shows up and they introduce themselves. Okay, so let's take a look at the worst example of it in all Lord of the Rings. It's actually the Hobbit books. The Hobbit book. The first like chapter or 2 in the Hobbit book, when all the dwarves show up, every single one of them was like, I'm Balin, son of Trallin, grandson of Curran, nephew to Galen. Like, they list all this crap, but like that's one chapter at the beginning of the book. And it's very clearly meant to be played for a laugh, because Bilbo's trying to like tell these guys, all right, you should please leave my house. And then another random guy comes up, tells him all the important titles, and then starts stealing his cheese. It's a joke that Tolkien's setting up, making fun of how overly verbose people's were with their names. Like, here, though, it's completely seriously done. It's just infuriating, because you're looking at it like, why are you, like, you're trying to lambast Tolkien and trying to show me how smart you are compared to him, but you're ripping off what he did, but you're doing it in a way that's, like, worse. Because if you look at Lord of the Rings itself, whenever Lord of the Rings has characters show up who tell you all about their backstory, like the biggest example is Boromir. Boromir shows up, I'm Boromir, son of Denethor II, steward of Gondor, brother to Faramir. It's like, I don't give a shit. Who the go away? But then you meet all those characters throughout the book, because that's super important for later on.
Yeah, like, in this novel, Foam Follower, when you meet him, he's like, let me tell you the entire story of my people in like a 6-page story inside the story. And then you never meet another giant ever again. And none of it is important at all.
And he doesn't show back up till book 3 for like a cameo.
Wow.
It's not even in book 2.
The worst part, it's the most interesting part of the book is that stuff. That's the worst part. The only parts with any levity to the miserable march that is this book are the characters explaining things that don't matter.
For real.
I don't know how you fail this bad as an author. I don't quite understand it. How you make
a few things
this
I want to
novel.
tell you that you're going to find interesting. This book was a bitch to get published. He started trying to get it published in 1972, and he was rejected 49 times. That's why that's the number in the book. But
he apparently wrote the next 2 books already. All of the books were written by the time this finally got published.
Yeah.
Dude, if I was a publisher and someone handed this book into me, I would call the police.
I would be like, you sir need to be in an institution, which they still had in 77.
Side note, I want to shout out my own message from chat earlier. By the way, come join the Discord if you haven't already. We've been talking about this book all week. The names in this book are insane. Every time a character shows up, it'll be like, "Hell there, Thomas Covenant. I'm Thistle Bissell, son of Blingardi Gadorian, lord of the Jimmy Mummy clan. We've held these lands for 30 times minus 4 years when the great Lord Kevin gave them to us."
Shit.
It's like, what the hell is this?
And the weird multiplication. As soon
I
as
don't know what the deal with that is.
Lord Fowl in his initial prophecy, because this book is full of fucking random prophecies. Lord Fowl initially, he's like, "Oh yes, if you don't do this, then you will all die in 7 times 7 days. But if you do it, then you will have 7 times 15 days, and I will be here the whole time, but only after 7 times 3 days. You see." And they just keep doing that randomly in the book for no reason. There's no lore explanation. You would think that maybe I don't know, maybe Lord Fowl can't say complete numbers. He must render them down into mathematical formula. Maybe. We don't know, because he just does that for no reason. Probably because Stephen Donaldson was like, "Oh yeah, this'll sound cool. This'll be really cool." He talks
If just Lord Fowl did that, it'd be great. Because like, oh, he's a weirdo, he's a psychopath, his brain thinks differently. Sure, that would be really interesting. But then everybody counts like that. And it's like, okay, so this is how you people count? Are you retarded? Like,
Yeah.
and I want to say for a second,
are.
chat, I understand that is how a lot of other languages do things. Like, I know French, so you can't say the number 80, it's 20 times 4. I get that. But like, it's stupid there too. They're an inferior species. Like they speak French for God's sake.
This dude is fucking American. He speaks English. It's his native language. We have normal numbers.
And it's not like the people in the
written
universe
for
are being
English
translated.
speakers, too.
They speak English in the world too.
Yeah.
Explicitly.
Yeah. I wish I had more good to say about this book, but I really don't. It's just the prose is evocative, and that's it.
Well, let's talk about
How to like explain things overly too much, like with good detail. It's here. There's situations where it'll be like, do you have any specific prose that you want to cite? Because there's some great stuff. Like the sun rose upon the land with a red light that was like the pustules on a boil. Like, oh, like that's that he doesn't like the sun in that instance. It's very evocative. You're like, wow, I know exactly what's going on here. But like it's a good way to do it. But then he goes on for like 40 minutes talking about it. Like, oh my God, shut up. Every time.
For real.
there is something interesting about this book that we do need to touch on. And we mentioned it as a joke before, but it's actually kind of serious. The fact that this is just a modern Japanese isekai.
Yeah.
It really is.
It's
It's every single note. Yeah,
so I know Kid has some things prepared about the specifics and how it's very likely that Japanese people probably read this story.
I'm going to explain
let's
how they
go
got
over-
there, and I want you to go through the list after we get there, okay?
Okay, that's fine.
So the reason is, and you might be wondering, why this book? So Japan was basically in a destitute slump after we nuked them and became back-to-back World War champs. So after we taught them a lesson about humility, the Japanese realized, hey, we don't need this military stuff anymore. We can focus on industry, which is why the Japanese became a military industrial power in like the 70s and 80s. And that's what, if you go back then, everybody thought that how everybody thinks China's going to kill us now. They thought Japan was going to kill us in the 90s. The difference is the Japanese mostly had our cultural values compared to the Chinese who've explicitly said we're coming to kill you. But that's a side point. So at the time, they really wanted to start importing and getting more culture. This is where you start seeing American culture flood in Japan. This is why you see the Mad Max getting into here. I know it's Australian, but it still was released in America. Mad Max gets shown in here, and that directly inspires Fist of the North Star, which inspires all modern anime where people scream and punch each other. So that style came from there directly. Then you have stuff like D&D. The first edition of D&D is the only one that was a success in Japan. And you can see that if you go, even today when you go look at something like Delicious in Dungeon or Dungeon Meshi for you people who go outside more, if you watch that show, all the monsters are their AD&D counterparts. The way fighters work, the way spell casting works, even the fact that the class is halfling and the class is dwarf, that is just 100% AD&D. You just go look at it, you're like, wow, this is just a legacy of that. This book came out at the same time. This was sweeping the American zeitgeist, and people are all about how interesting this book is. Right when the American zeitgeist was infiltrating Japan, so this book more than anything besides Baby Lord of the Rings would have been brought over there. That this would be huge in Japan, and a lot of guys who grow up to make fantasy stuff would have read this book as a kid. And now you get to be like 30 and 40-year-olds, and they're making isekais, and they're making animes. Now is when you get the chance to do this stuff. And that's why the cultural influence can be shown here. And as Shadow's going to show us in a second, it is incredible how much detail there is. Take it away, Shadow.
So let's go over it. Hell yeah. Some of it is circumstantial, some of it must be deliberate. So let's talk. The first most obvious one is how he gets to a fantasy world. He's hit by a car. It's literally it's literally a trope at this point. That's why you have people saying Truck-kun, my beloved. It's just because people are always getting hit by cars and being sent to other worlds. It's like meeting in a tavern in D&D.
Yeah.
On top of that, it actually plays into a subtrope of that of wasn't actually hit, because he's not actually hit by the vehicle.
Yep.
He just thinks he is, and he freaks out.
He's such a little bitch that he falls over.
Yeah, like a little bit. A very funny isekai does that I know Pag is a fan of. On top of that, he has a status window in the screen. It's not called that because those type of games weren't around, but a big trope is people being able to analyze things and see stats and stuff. It's explicitly stated that in the world, when he looks at a plant, he knows how healthy the plant is. He knows the name of the plant. He knows what season it blooms in. And that's a big thing in isekais. Him being the chosen one is an isekai trope. Him sexually molesting someone and it not being a big deal for some reason is also an isekai trope. The specifics here where he just straight up rapes someone is on the extreme end. You don't see that often, but you see people will always bring up waifus and harems, right, as a big thing in isekai. He effectively gets away scot-free with having sex with a minor. And that's also a thing that sometimes happens in isekai. He brings an object with him from the other world that makes him powerful. That sometimes happens. Sometimes in modern isekai, it's a smartphone. Sometimes it's not very specific, like they'll just have their clothes on. He never uses his knowledge of the of like Earth to do anything useful in the fantasy world, which is more of a trope. But yeah, there's just like
Future
all of
books.
these little things that just sort of he does in later books.
Yeah.
Okay, well, there you go. He does that in later books. It's all these little things. And another trope that this book copies, totally unintentionally, this isn't meant to be a trope, it's just a thing. When the isekai is first setting up the story, it's really, really good and interesting. And then the execution totally falls flat and is just like dog shit for the rest of the story. That happens way too much. And to respond to Alex Gomez, it's not a rape fantasy. If you were here earlier on, the Thomas Covenant, the main character of this book, literally rapes a 16-year-old girl.
I mean, that can be a rape fantasy. Like that. Don't get me wrong. That can be a fantasy, but the thing is, the actual rape, it's like 3 sentences long. It's not. He describes everything else in like long, flowery terms, but thank God at least we are spared from his like weird pornographic description of that, because I'm sure it would have been. I'm sure that after the like 15th rejection, the publisher was like, "Hey man, maybe this 16-page long child rape scene, maybe you could tone that down a little bit, just a little bit." And he was like, all right, I guess I'll make it 3 sentences."
Oh, there's another trope I forget.
I'm not saying remove the child rape scene, but maybe condense it down a little.
Yeah.
Maybe, yeah. So something I forgot to mention, because there's just too many. There's a lot of similarities. Another isekai trope is that the main character has a unique power that can't like no one else can use, which he does. His marriage ring gives him super wild magic, and on top of that, the reluctant hero is a big thing in isekai. And just like over there, it's always the shittiest character archetype they can pick. This is just the literal like worst version of it that I have ever had
For real.
the horror of experiencing.
Having
And-
the hero refuse the call to adventure is a classic thing. That is narrative 101 is
Does
for
it?
a little bit the hero yeah. I mean, you could name a bazillion different novels and stories where the main character resists going on the adventure. Frodo in Lord of the Rings.
Yep.
In most of the time, they get over that in like the first 10-15% of the book. He never accepts the call to adventure. One of the very last things in the book, when they're all being pursued down the side of Evil Mountain, he's like, oh man, instead of using my power to save me and everyone else here, I'm going to take my ring off and throw it in the ravine. He has to be stopped by force from doing this. Like, it's insane. It's just crazy. Like, why would you want to write a character like this? I mean, I've even read other like books where the main character is just a miserable fuck the whole time, and it's still better than this.
I think the big thing here, and this is something I was talking to my dad about, the reason Covenant sucks as a character is not only is he a misanthropic little bitch who denies the call to adventure, he absolutely refuses to be proactive in the story. If he was proactive, and this is like a good example of this is actually Rick from Rick and Morty. He sucks. He's probably the biggest shitbag that's on TV right now. But people like him because he's proactive. People like a proactive character. If he's doing stuff, you can ignore him being a terrible person. Covenant is both a terrible person who then does nothing. It's horrible if they have
he's just
somehow
dragged
both.
from one place to another. Yeah.
He's literally dragged by some snatches. I see where Phone Father picks him up and just walks him places because he's such a little baby. He's throwing a fit and won't go anywhere. And like, all right, let's put him on the horse. Like, come on,
and
man.
he has so there's one point in the novel where Covenant has evil boots. His boots are evil. It's just a fact. They're ensconced in evil. They're dripping with evil, and everybody can see it. Everybody knows if you just take your boots off, Thomas Covenant, we have another pair of boots to give you. Just take your boots off, buddy. Just all you have to do. And he's like, no, these boots are mine. They are what makes me me. These boots. So I'm not gonna take them off, and you can't make me. And that's like, it's seriously for probably like 2,000 words. This stupid thing keeps happening where he's like struck ill repeatedly just because he just refuses to take his stupid fucking boots off.
There's not even
4 times
payoff
throughout the
to it.
novel.
No. Eventually he just takes them off. At the end of the 2,000 words or so, he's just like, oh yeah, I guess I'll take them off. Or no, he doesn't take them off. He falls unconscious, and the other characters have to take his boots from him.
Yeah, so
He
they
literally
explain what's
can't
going
even
on.
take his boots off.
Yeah, so to explain to Nat Alfarius, he's very confused. Thomas Covenant's walking around, and all of a sudden he feels like literally Satan's breathing down his neck, and he jumps for fright because he feels evil around him. And they're like, oh, that's weird. He spends like 2 or 3 pages complaining about it. Then, later on, it happens again. And this time, the people he's traveling with are like, hang on a sec, we're ready for this time, Covenant. Where is Satan? He's like, I don't know, it's right here, where I was standing. And they like touch the ground like, I don't feel nothing, buddy. Let's try it again. Okay, later on it happens again. And this time, like, is it your shoes? Take your shoes off. Do you feel it? It's like, no, I don't feel it now that I have my shoes off. Oh, well, you should get some new shoes. No. It happens like 3 more times, and he's refusing, like Pag said. And it ends with him being knocked unconscious to, like, take those damn boots off of him. I'm tired of him complaining about evil on his toes.
Yeah, just take this fucking child's boots away from him.
And nothing happens of it. You know, another thing I just want to bring up. Okay, I don't know if this comes up in, like, book 2, maybe, but, you remember earlier when I said the elves got burned down and the kid, the lady survived, and it was like, oh, that's kind of weird, you know, that they're there. The fucking kid the whole time was like, Covenant, you're evil. Nobody likes you. I hope everybody kills you in your sleep. You know, and he's like, oh yeah, well I'm gonna have you stay with the totally not Mongols. And the lady looks at him. He's like, please don't. I'm pretty sure this kid is possessed by evil. And he looks over at the kid, and the kid's like, your mother will suck cocks in hell. And Covenant's like, nah, he's fine. Like, what? And it never comes up.
Yeah,
He
kids
likes
chill.
horses. No. He looks at him and he's like, no, I think he just really likes horses.
Speaking of horses, the whole horse thing is so ridiculous. So, like Kid explained a little bit earlier, he was like, "Oh yeah, he was able to call these Ranheim, which are these special magical horses, and that nobody else in the whole world can ever get more than 2 or 3 of." So he calls all of them. Then he tells them to go visit his rape victim once a year, and then nothing ever happens with that again. It's just like, oh wow, you're really special, guy. Good job calling those not horses. I'm so
Except all the
proud.
Mongols think he's the coolest guy ever because he got all the horses. So they like start sucking his dick.
Yeah.
Yeah, because everyone loves Thomas Covenant, even though he's, as we've mentioned, a miserable rapist. And I feel like maybe we're harping on the rape too much. But
I don't think
like
we are.
also
That's
it happened so early on. How am I ever supposed to forget that this man raped a 16-year-old? How can I ever, if I have to, like, there are 9 books in this series altogether, or like 10 of them. How am I ever supposed to, like, remove from my mind, oh man, he did it, he saved the world. Too bad he raped a 16-year-old.
Yeah, if your character rapes someone at the beginning of your novel, you have to do a lot of work to unfuck that for your character.
And you totally can do it.
Lot.
I think, and honestly,
yeah, it's possible. They do it in The Stars My Destination. Great novel.
Not just that, this book specifically has the easiest time ever for you to be able to fix that. He doesn't think this is real. So it's already, you have the, I thought when I was reading this book, that's the setup. He doesn't think it's real, so he thinks he can get away with it. And then the whole time reading, like, okay, but he never reconciles that fact. He never goes back and apologizes and tries to fix it and realizes no. Because had he just been swearing it's not real, did this horrible thing, and then realized, oh my god, I thought this was fake the whole time. That's at least a story you can have there, and that's like a character who's got to deal with the consequences. No. Like I said, the next book, his daughter forgives him for raping her mom into insanity.
Yeah,
gosh,
it's absurd. And like, I don't know, there's a lot of excuses that one could make, but like, I don't think that any of them hold water. Like the whole he thought it was a dream thing. What sort of dream is so vivid that you go to sleep and wake up multiple times inside the dream? 2, you have full feeling, smell, the lot. Like what sort of dream has those 2 things? And then like when you're fucking in this dream, why are you just like, well, I guess I'm in a dream where all of my problems are cured and everything is fine. I guess I ought to rape a child. I think that's the next logical step.
I want to add to that. I want to add to that real quick. When he meets Lena at the beginning of the book and she's trying to help him out and everything.
Oh, nice and sweet.
She heals his leprosy.
Yes, he heals his leprosy. He's super nice. It's the first person who's been nice to him outside of the leprosarium. In his own words, it's like the first time someone has been like genuine. So he doesn't know what leprosy is. He doesn't understand it. So he just wants to talk. And the entire time he says his cat's line of "I'm a leper, I'm unclean," and hellfire over and over again.
Hellfire. By the way, I do want to click a side note. NNNN, you're in luck, my friend. He's coming on the podcast next week.
Oh boy,
we're talking about kaiju next week.
I see.
But yeah, Hellfire. That's
him repeating descriptions and words all the time. And the irritating thing is, you can see in his prose that he's got chops. Dude has some fucking writing chops. He doesn't need to call. Yeah, he doesn't need to call Lord Drool's eyes Laval, which isn't a word, by the way, every 20 pages. He doesn't need to use that same description every single time he describes his eyes. He doesn't need to have the main character have a catchphrase, which is Hellfire, that he says once a page. He doesn't need to do these things. He's got chops, but he doesn't use them.
Thomas Covenant is an author in the book, by the way. That's something I think we forget, is that he's also an author. So Thomas Covenant as a character himself should probably have an expanded, vocabulary.
What's really weird about this book is there's a lot of times whenever you're reading a novel and you feel like that a character is a self-insert, this really feels like a lot of the author's hang-ups are in this book. It's really, really strange.
Someone should look in that dude's closet.
You know what? I'm
Let's see
glad
what
you
sort of
brought that up.
skeletons are in there.
So it's time for the fun facts part of the podcast. So I went through about 40 interviews with this guy. He doesn't have anything super interesting to say, except for a couple highlights here. First thing is he specifically said that he does not read other authors in the fantasy genre. He prefers to read sci-fi people. And the interviewer said that this is common among fantasy authors. I find that fascinating because I always was taught, especially by Brandon Sanderson, that you should probably read what you're writing. And it's weird that apparently this is known as a common thing in fantasy, where fantasy authors don't read their own thing. And I'm going to tell you fucking people right now, this explains why fantasy's been awful for so long. Because, my God, should you just read fantasy if you want to write fantasy? It's frustrating.
It's so bizarre to not read things you're interested in. I don't understand that. Like, I don't understand being super into something and then like not reading other people's thing. Great example. I really like making dungeons for my tabletop RPG games. And the reason for that, as a side effect, I really like playing dungeon crawling video games. Because they're very, very similar, and you can get cross inspiration from both of them. Fantasy is a very big genre. There's a lot of things that are fantasy, and back in those days, fantasy was still like evolving. He clearly read Lord of the Rings, right? He clearly has either played D&D or knew about it. So I don't really believe that he hasn't read fantasy.
I don't even say he also clearly read pulps. The fact that it's the staff of law, that's only something you get if you've read something like Elric of Melniboné, because that book is specific about law versus chaos. That's a huge thing in there. And the fact that it's the staff of law, not the staff of good, not the staff of righteousness, no, law. That's not used except for in Elric, and then eventually D&D steals it from Elric, which is how it gets propagated everywhere else. It's so I don't get it.
And there's nothing wrong with propagation. Propagation is great. You know, Tolkien propagated all of fantasy for us, and now here we are talking about the worst bastardization of it. And we can make better things probably, but for some reason people are writing this instead because I guess they want to be different.
So I do want to point out Ferris. I know it can work, but here's the thing. Him being an author never comes up in the book. It is a useless piece of information. If you wanted to write the story better, him being an author could easily be done well. Because here in the story, they have what's called Kevin's lore, which just ignore how stupid it is. Basically, it's a scroll. It's an Elder Scroll that they have from Kevin the Great. And they can't understand what's on it. They cannot figure it out. It's too powerful for them to read. At the end of the book, they find a second Kevin Elder Scroll. And it's just kind of like, oh, we found it. Don't read it, though, because it's too powerful for us. The motherfucker's an author.
They found it. They found it because none of them could pass the test in order to get to the second thing. For 2,000 years, no one has been strong enough to pass the test to get his second book of lore. And yet, Thomas Covenant just shows up and is like, "Oh, I guess I'm just gonna grab it. It'll be fine, right?" And he just does.
They have an Elder Scroll.
It's infuriating.
The dude's an author. He should read it. And what it should be, if you're like smart, you know how things are written, is, as an author, he's got a magical superpower of just being able to words okay. So he realizes, Kevin's thing's just written backwards in a cipher or something. I don't know. I'm not the asshole writing this. You could easily come up with a way as the author he should know it. Or, better, he realizes, oh my gosh, that you have to replace these names with facts. They're like, these characters, Frodo, it's supposed to be Frodo Baggins, so you replace it with the B for here. And this is how you cast the spells. It's so frustrating because, it never comes up. And this book is full of that. Of just this never comes back up, and I don't get it. Or stuff that does come up is just weird. Like Klingor comes up constantly, and it's because he just wanted an excuse to have a gluable rope, sticky rope. It's just sticky rope. And I'm looking at
it's
really,
just sticky rope.
It's just sticky rope. And it's that's it. But this is the most well researched and talked about thing in the fucking book. All right, so here's another fun fact. He wrote the first 6 Thomas Covenant books, basically all together. He wrote the first 3 before the first was published. Then he wrote the second 3 afterwards. Cool. Then there's a 20-year time jump before he put the next Thomas Covenant books. So here's the thing. If I told you, hey, a bunch of books came out in the 80s, and then it took 20 years for the next books to come out, what would you think is the reason for that? Maybe it's because the story was complete. You don't have to tell anymore. No. That would be what I would say as an honest person here. Donaldson, who I'm not accusing of dishonesty, I'm just implying it, said that, oh no, he had more story to tell. However, he wanted to write some sci-fi books first, which we're going to get to, don't you worry. After he wrote them, to prove that he wasn't a one-hit wonder, and those didn't sell very well, he suddenly had a story for Thomas Covenant in mind. And he said, I had my outline ready to go in my head, and I decided to sit down and write it. This was, he's like, I recall, the day I decided to do this, it was the middle of September, on September 10th, 2001. Then the next day happened, and I just couldn't work. Apparently 9/11 stopped us from getting Thomas Covenant for a decade. What?
Oh, thank you, 9/11. Base 9/11.
Well, I was reading the interviews. Like, yeah, 9/11 happened, and I just couldn't write. I'm like, the fuck you mean you couldn't write? Like, you're an author. What?
Hearing you tell this makes me wonder if I'm in fact in a dream right now.
I was in Ohio.
Oh, don't do it, Shadow. Don't do it.
Am I in a dream right now? Does that mean it's okay if I just go insane and act like a whiny baby?
Also, he's a
Jesus
black belt in
Christ.
Shotokan karate. I just wanted to share that because I thought it was really funny.
Oh, hey, that's one of the good types of karate.
Yeah,
there's a lot of like bad types of karate, but Shotokan is a good one.
Mm-hmm.
He also says he wishes he could have written for operas at one point. I
don't know if Bro's got the chops for that.
Yeah. So here's another thing, and I think this is something I want. This is one of those bullets in my back pocket I saved for this stuff. Yeah, Ohio Riz. Yes, he's a skibbity boy. In fact, he got rizzed really hard because you ever hear the Kent State shootings when that happened? Yeah, he was a student there at the time. He was cowering in the building. I think some trauma may have built up from that because the next year is when he started writing Thomas Covenant.
Yeah, that makes the books make a lot more sense.
Doesn't it?
The idea of
Doesn't it?
this powerless person who has to like rely on blind luck to survive, suddenly that makes a lot of sense. That's probably how he felt.
Yeah. Yeah, you're probably right.
Maybe there was even survivor's guilt. Maybe that's why Thomas Covenant is such a piece of shit. It was his survivor's guilt leaking through. I don't know. I don't think we should like hyper-analyze his life and make assumptions about it. But if we were going to do that, that would kind of make sense. I could kind of see that.
Now we get to the part of the podcast where, Peg, I need you to do me a favor. I need you to spend the next 10 minutes, lock up all your guns, give your wife the key, and tell her to not give it to you for an hour. Because we need to talk about his sci-fi world.
Oh, no.
We need to talk about sci-fi.
I'm so ready to hear about this. Oh, while you're locking up your guns and putting away all the alcohol, I was complaining about this story to a friend because I read it very early. I felt bad about not being able to finish the book on time last podcast, so I read this one early. And I was complaining about it to a friend about how I read this shitty book about a leper rapist, and they said, "Holy shit, shut up, wait a minute." And they sent me a photo of like their complete collection of the first 3 books. And they were like, "I know what you're talking about. They made us read this. It was dog shit."
You know, and speaking of making reads, so if you're wondering why this book was up on my list, it's on my shelf right now too, actually. So my dad read this back when he was in college, and I was baffled at how could he get through this. And I asked my dad, like, "How did you get through this book?" And he's such a miserable prick, and he's like, "Yeah, I guess." My dad's like, "Yeah, I'm explaining things." Like, I don't remember that at all. Like, how do you not remember these things? Like him complaining all the time about hellfire. He's like, "Yeah, I do think I remember that." And I'm like, "How do you not remember this?" So it's like, "Well, I'm gonna be honest, man. Like, when I read it, I was in my 20s in college." And well, we didn't have a lot, TV back at the dorm back then. And whenever you didn't have a lot of money, you just roll up a joint and start reading this book. I'm like, that makes so much fucking sense. You read one chapter when you're high. This book would be phenomenal if that's how you read the book.
Yeah,
One
probably.
chapter while high, and you put it down and forget about it for a week or so. Like that's the best way to get through it. And like that makes sense. This is the perfect book to read while high. Each chapter is just interesting enough to keep your attention, but you can just gloss over all the shenanigans and not care.
There's a lot of things that don't age well that like you remember being really good, but then you go back and you're like, wow, this was awful.
You know what? I'm going to give a real spicy hot take. Everybody duck and cover. That's Dinotopia. That's coming up in the next video or two. I know I just made a video praising it. You Dinotopia fans are going to be real mad because, oh boy, does Dinotopia get real bad real quick.
But you know what? I mean, they might not care. I'm sure there are some people who will be upset. But I'm sure there are other people who will be like, well, yeah, I didn't read those later books, or I didn't really like those later stories as much. It's kind of the reason why I say, like, all stories should have an end. It's much better for a story to, like, end and just be okay than for it to go on forever and to be, like, shit.
I think that people need to realize that you could end a story, but it doesn't mean the world has to end in the story. Like,
yeah,
stop following the same characters. That's all you got to do. Just switch up the characters for a new story. Blows my fucking mind.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you could tell easily stories from multiple. Not a single fantasy world out there that relies solely on the main character that's worth reading, because you can set up just enough interesting stuff. You can explore some of those situations.
Mm-hmm.
Probably right. I think Covenant. I don't know if Covenant would freak you out while you're smoked, because the book itself, the prose is very evocative. So if you're high and you're like, oh man, this guy's describing things like his eyes are made of rubies. Whoa, man, that's awesome. Like that's got to be fun.
Thomas Covenant is much more miserable than he is awful. That's kind of part of the reason why he's miserable and awful. That's why it's so bad. Like I said earlier, if the rape scene didn't happen, I would still be able to complain about Thomas Covenant for hours.
Yeah.
And like that's, to be fair, he sucks as a person, but like that's the only outwardly egregious thing I think that I would say. That's something like I would just remove it completely. This doesn't add to the book in any way. It doesn't add to his character in any way.
Yeah, he goes from being like a pathetic worm to being a pathetic worm who's also like a predator and awful.
Yeah.
Like just with that one thing, and you could just take that out and it would be not fine, but it would be better.
And I think it would serve the story better for him being a pathetic worm, because him raping her kind of makes it seem like he's got agency in action when that goes against the rest of the story.
Yeah.
The most proactive thing to happen that Thomas Covenant does is rape a 16-year-old. Oh my god. I didn't even consider.
And it's not relevant to characterization. He just gets really mad at his ex-wife and rapes this girl. Who, by the way, has been the nicest person ever.
He's like, oh man, I'm in this fantasy world where evil doesn't exist and my leprosy is cured. I'm so angry about this. Let me rape a child. Like, what?
It's not I gotta say something. This really pissed me off because personally, like, I don't know how you guys read stories. Sometimes when you're reading a story, like a character will remind you of somebody you know or another story from some media. My roommate's girlfriend, I'm not going to say her name, but she's just a very sweet girl. Very nice, just, Christian girl, very wholesome. I didn't know that Lena was the one who got raped. So I'm reading the story, like, oh, she reminds me of my roommate's girlfriend. She's just very nice and very helpful. And, I get, she's probably a little bit extra here. So the Covenant rapes her. I'm sitting like, man, like, come on, man. Like, really? Yeah. All right, so, hope you're ready, chat. This is the Rape-a-thon, the rape section of the podcast. You might be saying, what the hell are you talking about? This is scary. Oh, it's very scary. We're getting into sci-fi.
We've said rape so many times on this episode. It's kind
You're not ready for this. So, Peg, is all your weapons locked up? Are you unable to kill yourself immediately?
Let's go with yes.
All right. So as long as you don't commit sewer slide, remember that's what we said to YouTube. It's sewer slide, and we're talking about the small purple fruit called grapes. So Donaldson loves grapes. He has a sci-fi series called The Gap, which, quote, follows several mass murderers and rapists. And at first I'm like, okay, I'm really interested to hear what's going on with this situation. So I looked into it. The main character is a lady named Morn. She has a space cop in the far future. Humanity's gone through space and basically running out of resources, but they've got an expansive enough space empire. Okay. So as she's going around, she realizes, hang on, I need to go after this pirate named Angus. He's raiding too many of our supply lines and causing too much of an issue. So she decides to take him down. And she also works for a mining company that her family is heavily invested in. So her family is her crew on her ship. She sails to meet Angus. And Angus ends up doing some juke maneuvers and ends up, kidnapping her. And also the ship that her family's on gets blown up, which that does suck, so she's now stuck with him. Angus decides, hey, I didn't kill your family because it was an accident, which he's correct. He also actually sucks as a pirate. He's not really good at this whole piracy thing. And he decides, I need to make it so I can get out of the situation alive, but I kidnapped somebody. How do I get out of the situation? So, Peg, you have a thing in your setting called an NII. Basically, Donaldson also invents this, but it's not good. It just has all the Angus. It has all of the benefit. It has none of the benefits of an NII, but all the drawbacks. So he inserts it into her head, into this girl's head, which would allow him to say, "Hey, I didn't kidnap you, right?" And she'd be forced to say, "Yeah," but it allows you to control her physical body too. And while they're hanging out, he's like, if I can make her forget stuff, I bet I can rape her and she wouldn't remember it. And he begins raping her so much, he falls in love with her. And the whole time, another cop named Nick is tracking them down. And eventually, Nick shows up, arrests Angus, and then saves her. But she knows she's been raped, but she deletes the memory of it from her body, but she has to tell people she was because he's got videos of her being raped. So they send Angus to super prison for all the time. Then book 2 opens up, as you would expect. Now Nick, our hero, the cop who saved her, and Morn are hanging out. And what's the first thing Nick says? He's like, you know what, Morn? I'm so glad I saved you. How about you start blowing me immediately? And she's like, I was just raped. And he said, that's how I know it's got to be good. So he then basically starts raping her. But here's the thing. She pretends to like it to make him like her more. So she turns off her brain the whole time. And then some other guy who's kind of another crew member on the ship named Orn shows up. And he starts raping her. But it's a bad way this time. Because she doesn't like that she's being raped by him. But she kind of likes when Nick rapes her. And God damn this fucking thing. And eventually Nick finds out that the girl he's been raping is being raped by another crew member, so he kills that crew member, but it turns out that crew member had hacked into the ship and made a retrovirus that would scuttle the ship if he ever was killed.
Oh my god.
What in the world is this guy's issue?
I don't know.
A lot of things. A lot of things. I like writing dark stories. My stories tend to be morbid in gory ways, but holy shit.
Oh my god, this is just... So then, as the power is turning off, Morn is in a medical bay because she was being healed from getting smacked around by Orn, and it turns out she's pregnant. The kid that she's pregnant with was Angus, though, the pirate who raped her at the beginning. Because her whole family's dead, she feels like she must keep the child. So now she's going to keep her rape baby. Nick shows up and is like, don't worry, babe, we're all going to die, but I killed the guy. And, she's like, oh, well, I can probably help fix the ship. He's like, great. And then I'll kill your baby and we can go back to having great sex together. And she's like, I got a better idea. How about you don't kill my baby and I'll fix the ship? They apparently argue for 2 chapters about this while they're flying towards the sun before Nick agrees. And then Nick says, okay, we're going to fly to the nearest space station, which is owned by some gene editing dudes called the Ambrosi, who basically have a virus that they make that overwrites your DNA and makes you into one of them. And when they get there, Nick negotiates to have them help out. And they say, all right, so one of the things we want to help out is we need a vial of your blood, Nick, because he's got antibodies that prevent him from being turned into them people. So knowing that, they're like, we want to find out how you do it so we can obviously get around this. And part of the thing she says, all right, so she wants this kid. I don't want a baby on my ship because it's a bit of a mood killer. Could you, like, help me? And the alien's like, I got you, fam. They take the baby out, immediately raise it to the age of 16. But here's the thing.
Oh, no.
They realize, all right, so now they have a 16-year-old boy. They're like, we got to give this boy some memories. Do we have any human memories laying around? No, we don't. I know. Let's just copy his mother's memories into him, because that won't have any problems.
What the fuck?
No.
But here's the thing.
What the fuck?
The kid doesn't have the memory blocker that allows him to forget being raped. So the 16-year-old kid remembers, like, being raped for the last 4 years, including that Nick was the one raping him. So he then tells Nick, hey, stepdad, my mom hates you because you're raping her. And he's like, no, she doesn't. She loves me. He's like, oh, yeah? She's faking it with her, like, implanted faking chip she has in her head. So you've been actually raping her. Nick gets so angry at this that he sells the kid to the Ambrosians for cash so he can fix his spaceship.
What the fuck is wrong with Stephen Donaldson? Literally, what is wrong with this person?
And
Like,
then...
actually.
Then the mom wakes up from the coma thing that the aliens put her in, and after she wakes up, she takes over the whole space station somehow. Is hacking her superpower, and she demands that they fix the ship and she gets her kid back, or she's going to scuttle their whole spaceship. This works, but then the moment they get back onto their ship, the aliens are like, we're just going to send our fleet to go kill them. So they do that, and they're like, okay, we'll kill you unless you give us this, the 16-year-old that's got all the rape memories back. And Nick's like, fine, we'll do that. But the mom's smart. She programs the escape pod to not go to the alien ship, but to go to a nearby pirate planet, because I guess the kid will be safer on the pirate planet? Here's the thing, though. This is book 2. So you might be wondering, what about Angus? He was billed as the main character, the pirate. You see, he's been turned into a cyborg and had his mind partially wiped and being controlled. So now he's a Suicide Squad spy agent. And then while he's there, he just so happens to be sent as a Suicide Squad agent to this pirate planet. So a 16-year-old crashes who looks exactly like him, who's his ex-rape victim's son, who also finds out that she's been being raped by a new guy. So then Angus decides, I'm going to be a hero now, and I'm going to go kill Nick, who's the previous hero for raping her. And Angus becomes the good guy who goes in and saves her, essentially. This is a 5-book series.
Okay.
Wow.
Okay. Before, I want to say something. So, making good art that challenges your sensibilities, right, is a very hard thing to do. And I think there's a lot of value to art that just challenges your sensibility in an interesting way. Good example of something recent. There are a bunch of game series called Fear and Hunger. And in that game, you can literally get ass raped and die. And it's disgusting, and it's gross, and it's awful. But it's also very interesting because there's other things going on. It's challenging your sensibility to build towards something, to build towards the sense of dread, of like never feeling safe, to put you in the mind space of someone who is like not just fearing for their life, but fearing for more than just their life. And these books do not fucking do that. They're just challenging your sensibility to be like, oh, shock horror. Haha, I got you. Yeah, more rape. And it's shock horror. And
if it was shock horror, then it would be written more grotesquely. This is like really, really.
Oh, just the author's a weird fetish.
Yeah. I was reading, like, because the reason I found this is he was complaining. There's an interview I was reading where he's like, everybody only asks me about Thomas Covenant. Nobody cares about my other sci-fi books, The Gap, which is fantastic, and more people didn't read it. And the fact that, I almost killed myself when it wasn't on the New York Times bestseller because my Thomas Covenant books were. And I'm sitting there like, what's it about? Like, because C.S. Lewis also wrote a sci-fi book that's really good, apparently. That's a Christian horror story in space, which we probably will read on the podcast one day. But instead, you're looking like, but, like, what the hell could his book be about? And then somebody's like, oh, well, it's basically Nibelungen, which, I probably butchered it. That's the Ring Cycle, which is the most famous German, opera you've ever seen. If you've ever seen the fat Viking chick yodeling, that's what that is from. And you also would know this because if you've watched Mandalore, he did a video on it probably a year or two ago now. That's when Albrecht, when he comes on the skateboard and says, "I hate women," and skateboards away. That character, that's where that's from. That same play. So at first, I'm like, oh, that's really cool. You're taking it basically a classical of German literature and adapting it into a sci-fi setting. What a great idea! There's nowhere near this much rape in the other thing. I can tell you right now, it's a German poem from the 1600s. You'd expect there to be rape all over the place. There's like 2 rapes, which is, low for Germans. This chick is being raped so much, she creates mind blockages to prevent her from being raped. When I read the sentence, Angus raped her so much that he eventually falls in love with her. What?
Yeah, what the piss? All right. Yeah, no, don't ever suggest that I read Stephen Donaldson again. I will kill you. I will come to your house and kill you. Just telling you.
And then
I will
yourself
kill you.
in Minecraft.
Yes.
This is all in Minecraft, by the way. It's like, oh shit.
I'm baffled. Because I've read some terrible, some weird interviews with people. And some authors they say off the wall stuff, but like he was shocked that people didn't like it. And this is like the book. This is the whole book series. And it especially blows my mind because those of you who don't know, Pag's an author, and he's a sci-fi author, and you should go pick up his books. His first trilogy of books are written in with a technology level that's somewhat similar to what this setting was described as, where they had different aliens who could gene edit you, and they have like a computer you could put in your head. And at first I was like, oh, that's kind of neat. This guy had similar ideas. Let's see the differences he took. He took the idea of a computer in your head and said, yeah, what if it's just for rape? And I was like, dang, like, how did you just go down the worst possible rabbit hole with this?
Yeah, what if instead of exploring all of the interesting ways that would change humans and human society, what if instead rape? And then that's just 5 books of that.
I do like how that was so horrific. I got Grandma to say something.
Yeah, for real.
Yeah. So
Anyway,
yeah,
that's
Bane.
Lord Fowl's Bane. Do not read this fucking book. Do not read anything from Stephen Donaldson. You should probably send him hate mail. He sucks. He's awful.
But just don't read this book. And if you're wondering why this book has been forgotten, it is because of that. And I can tell you right now, it's because the author is also misanthropic. He's not a good-natured enough person that even if his work sucks, people want to keep him in the zeitgeist. There's a lot of authors who just aren't as good as you remember them, but they're so positive people still want to talk about them. And I could point to a couple right now. Heck, the Dinotopia is a great example of that, actually. The author's so positive and just, people like him that even though his books are mediocre at best, besides being an interesting premise, he gets still, love and people still like Dinotopia because the author is just positive. So you still want to engage with it positively. But yeah, all the interviews I read with this guy, he just seems bitter, and I don't understand why. Even the interviews I read back in the 80s, he just seemed like he just had a chip on his shoulder. And I guess it comes out in his writing. This also...
I unfortunately can't find a P.O. box or an email for Stephen Donaldson.
Nowhere to leave your hate mail.
That.
Oh, wait.
No, we disavow that. Because YouTube will take us down
like
for
it.
that.
It's a P.O. box. That's not his address.
But also, it's immoral. Don't send people hate mail.
It's totally moral to send Stephen Donaldson hate mail. It is completely moral.
Reviews on Amazon. How about you go leave bad reviews on Amazon for him? How about that?
You should send him poop.
No.
Freeze-dried poop.
No.
Freeze-dried, so it's not a chemical weapon.
He's joking. That's a joke.
All right.
In
so
Minecraft.
with that, I don't think anybody has anything else they want to add to this podcast. I figured that would be a conversation.
No, it was terrible.
It sure seems like it.
I'm happy we managed to have this group therapy session, and I'm so happy we managed to drag all of you into our collective group therapy session. It was really great, Doc. I'm happy you all sat there and listened as we ranted about the rape leper.
Alex, if anybody somehow gets a hold of Steven and he does want to come on the podcast, I will cancel everything to put him on. I have no problem bringing him on here. I do want to talk to him about and ask him questions about these things. Like,
I will slur that old man.
you
You
can
will-
if you want, but I want to know why. I would love to
Neither-
ask him. Well, I want to know like why you come up with these things. What influenced this? Why is your character such a prick?
I don't know. I feel like he's a prick in real life. I feel like if you meet him, he's gonna be like, "Yeah, I hate you. I can't believe you talked about my book. I hate that you talked about my book." Yeah, I believe it. Anyway, so yeah, whatever the next book is, kid doesn't get to choose it. He's chosen two absolute turds in the punt bowl or turds in the punch bowl. Like, they're awful. No way. No, you don't get to suggest a book, kid. No more.
No, the next book I'm going to suggest is a Piers Anthony novel because he's another one of those early fantasy guys that's referenced a lot.
I don't trust you anymore.
What? I'm recommending things that have historic value, not things that I think are good. We've been over this.
Yeah, the Rape of Name King has historic value. I don't want to watch a video of it.
It's historic. This book was very historic. Listen, I'm sure Kid will recommend good things in the future. I do think though. Yeah, that's okay. I do kind of agree that the next book should probably be something good.
Yeah.
That's a great
something good.
Share this podcast with people and tell them that that's the headline for the subtext for this podcast. Lord Farrell's Bane.
Yeah.
It needed more rape.
Yeah, it's like it needs more cowbell, except instead of the bell being wrong, it's a 16-year-old girl.
Oh God, I hate this book so much.
I do want to just read a piece of an interview from him that I wanted to get. People were asking if he was going to do a third Thomas Covenant book in the 80s, back when this came out. And he says, I don't know if I'm going to write it or not. I'm naturally a stubborn person, and the more people push me to write, the less likely I am to do it. I want to make writing decisions from conviction and strength, not from pressure and need. I will only write a Thomas Covenant book if my writing career collapses and I need to feed my children. Interesting.
Funny. That's funny. Ooh.
And then he wrote the gaps, and then he wrote a fourth one, or a third one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. I think we're done. I think. I
don't think there's any more that we can add to this.
It was a time, everybody. It was a time.
I'm so glad because I know that a lot of people in the, I don't know how to put this like politely, in the non-mainstream space will look at this book and say, I wonder why it's so lambasted by a lot of those people who are like, traditional media. I think this has been forgotten, not because it's actually some like deep subversive thing. I think it's been forgotten because it's just not very good, and that's unfortunate.
Yeah, it got forgotten because it sucks.
Yeah, that's unfortunate, but that's just how it happens sometimes. I really wish that this book was good. I would have really loved to have found a hidden gem of a subversive hidden gem, because we did Subversion on the last podcast. And I think that having 2 podcasts ago, I think having a piece of media that comes out and critiques a genre is very helpful and important. And that's what this was supposed to be. This was supposed to be a critique of fantasy and like especially the ripoffs of Tolkien at the time. And it just falls flat. So, yeah, any closing thoughts from anybody here?
Go buy my books instead. They're much, much better than this. Like, much, much better. Look up Lex Henderson.
Yeah.
Lex Henderson books.
I'll tell you this right now. The rapist in his books get shot.
Yeah, or worse.
Yeah, or worse.
Or worse. Please read Shia's book. Please read any modern isekai instead of this book. It will be the same experience. But even the worst ones will be interesting. Even go read That Time I Got Reincarnated as a Sex Worker, which is a real book. At least there's a plot line that's comprehensible.
The wildest thing is I came into this thinking, like, isekai is a trash genre for trash people with trash in it. And, like, this... I mean, first off, clearly yes, from this book.
But, like, obviously,
it goes up from here. Like, it can't go down from here. It has to go up from here. So
It doesn't.
maybe modern isekai does actually have something to it. You know, they had to wait 30 years before it could get popular again.
So true. So true.
Any closing
Yeah.
thoughts there, Tawata?
No, I'm reaffirmed in my gladness for having not read this book.
I
You're
am
probably the
jealous
smart
of
one
you.
here.
I envy you. Yeah. I'm gonna
Yeah,
have to
I got
pray for
lucky.
forgiveness about my enviousness regarding your not having read this rag.
Yeah,
All right.
that
And,
sounds pretty bad.
with that, I think we're going to call it here, everybody. I'm not sure if I'm streaming with Nebula later or not. He's been having some internet issues. I think he's got them fixed. I'll post in Discord if I am. Otherwise, come vote on the next book in the book club. And we are taking suggestions. I'll compile them together and probably tomorrow put up a poll. And Nebula says he's in chat now. He says he didn't read it. Yeah, he's also lucky. But we have had a lot of good books, so don't think that you just have to skip them all. Just go vote on them this time, guys. The other thing is next week, I wasn't kidding, by the way, we are going to be talking about Godzilla. Don't tell Black Rooney. I told him it's going to be just kaijus. I don't think he got this far in the video anyway.
Probably not.
So, yeah, with that, I will talk to you all later. You have an excellent one, and have a great day. Goodbye, guys.